God is amazing. All right, in Proverbs 8, let's call this one wisdom, understanding that the next two Proverbs are going to focus on that concept of wisdom. This one focusing on one thing, or maybe not focusing on, or bringing to mind for me one thing, and that is favor. So let's subtitle it Favor in this proverb that seems to break down into four sections. The first one in verses 1 through 11, talking about wisdom's call in one way or another. Moving on in verses 12 through 21 to talk about her dwelling or where she resides. Moving on in verses 22 through 31 to talk about her credentials before concluding in verses 32 through 36 to say, based upon all of these things, it makes kind of a therefore statement. You don't have to randomly or blindly search for wisdom because it seems like it's the right thing to do, as much as it is something that might actually benefit you. But going more in depth through the different sections in verses 1 through 11 that talk about her call, they may break down even more into two sections. The first 5 verses, 1 through 5, talking about her call, specifically where she calls from, which seemed to me like entrances and crossroads, which might be metaphorically entrances and crossroads in our lives. Moving on to talk about to whom she calls, that being the simple and fools, which might seem insulting until you realize we are all simple in some area. No one knows everything, and that can be the key to opening up wisdom, as we'll get to as we go on to talk about the rest of that section, which focuses on what she says. And it's a lengthy section that I'm going to generalize and possibly overgeneralize by saying she's basically saying straight truth, things that are right. Going back to a concept we mentioned before, basically things that represent integrity, and there is nothing shady about what wisdom brings. Moving on, however, to verses 12 through 21, it's going to talk about her dwelling, as we mentioned. It's going to first and foremost in verses 12 and 13 say that she dwells with prudence. In verse 14, away from evil. And ultimately in verses 15 through 21, it's going to describe the way in which she dwells with all who govern justly. In verse 17, however, focusing on the fact that she can be found not just by royalty, but all who seek her diligently, going back to that New Testament statement we saw in the book of Hebrews, where it talks about the one who would come to God must believe that he is, and he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. In the King James and New King James versions, we're seeing echoes of that here in the Proverbs. As we go on to that third section we mentioned in verses 22 through 31, where it talks about her credentials, and it is another lengthy section I might overgeneralize to say represents the way in which she existed before the earth ever was, with God still at its creation. It's going to say two things I found interesting. At the beginning of his work, she was there, daily the Lord's delight. But it wasn't simply a one-way relationship, because it's going to say that she rejoiced consistently, or it seems that she rejoiced constantly in his presence at the creation of the earth, as it is going to move into that final section, verses 32 through 36, saying, therefore, now listen, blessed are those who keep her ways in verse 32 and listen to her in verse 34, watching daily and waiting, once again, bringing to light that concept of diligently looking for wisdom in verse 34. It's going to say, for in the final section, whoever finds her finds life and obtains favor, thus the title. However, whoever fails to find wisdom really simply injures themselves, and whoever hates wisdom actually loves death. The things that most stood out to me from this chapter potentially being threefold. First of all, that being to whom she calls, the simple and the fools, reminding me of what James says, a passage that I often quote, saying, if any of you lacks wisdom, ask God, who gives generously. Just ask without any doubting. And the thing that this proverb reminded me of is the way in which one of the great impediments to us gaining wisdom can be our own pride. The unwillingness to be recognized as either simple or foolish, even though, as we said, none of us knows everything and we are all simple in some area. Reminding me that one of the great struggles that we have in life is trying to water down the truth to something that will allow us, A, better fit in our environment, whether it is our family, our workplaces, or our friend group. One of the red flags for a lack of wisdom is an environment that craves a version of the truth that is not the actual truth. Reminding me of at least one more thing that this proverb brought to mind, and that is the degree to which we all need favor from God, probably for the very reason that we just mentioned. All of us feel the pressure to either shave pieces off of the truth or water it down to something that just helps us fit under the pressures of life. And to the degree that we all feel that pressure and none of us is perfect at resisting it, we all need favor from God. This proverb reminding us that one of the advantages to diligently seeking wisdom is that it brings favor from God. See, as much as I want to have God's favor on my terms, the writer of this proverb seems to believe that he is more willing to give me favor when he sees that I am diligently seeking to do the things that are true and just and that are consistent with integrity.